Hey friends, Andy Doss here, and today we're going to talk about a big piece of furniture that has fascinated people for over 60 years. That's right, furniture. A chair, actually. Specifically, a really big chair. I think you will find this story very interesting. It's so great to have you along for this latest episode of History in Sight. If you drive through uptown Martinsville, Virginia today, you cannot miss the big chair. And you might wonder, what is that all about? I have encountered many people who didn't grow up in this area during its industrial heyday, and unless they have walked up to it and read the contextual signage, they generally just think it is a piece of art or that it has no real meaning. I mean, after all, it really is just a big chair standing there. Hundreds of people drive by it every single day and may never even look at it. And that being said, there are a lot of people who don't realize that there was actually another big chair there many years ago. Except that big chair was more subject to damage from weather and eventually rotted so bad it had to be taken down, and I'm getting ahead of myself, so more on that later. And what if I told you that there really was a big chair that was built in the small village of Bassett, Virginia and became a famous landmark even to this day, located in Washington, D.C.? Would you believe me? Well, it is true, and today I'm going to tell you all about it. The background here is that Bassett Furniture constructed the big chair for Curtis Brothers in Washington, D.C., who at the time was one of their largest accounts and a top seller of Bassett Furniture. Bassett had been looking for some sort of attention-getting spectacle that could draw everyone's focus to its product and serve as a big thank you to the Curtis brothers. So as it would turn out, there was a big chair in Thomasville, North Carolina, which represented the prowess of Thomasville Furniture, a huge manufacturer in that day and a rival of Bassett's. That big chair had been there for many years. The chair stood 18 feet tall and was erected on a 12-foot-high base. The thinkers at Bassett got the idea that they ought to manufacture one that would be bigger than what Thomasville had. Keep in mind that this was in 1958, so there was no internet with which just to look up information. Someone needed to find out more about Thomasville's big chair. So, what was Bassett going to do? Shown here are Eddie Bassett and Charles Bassett. They were the sons of John Edwin Bassett Sr., who at the time was the president of Bassett Furniture. Both sons were rising young stars in the management chain at the organization and very popular among the workers. They were tasked by their father with figuring out a way to build this big chair that would need to rival the one that Thomasville had on display. The two brothers hatched an ambitious plan. They got in a car and drove down to Thomasville's big chair. Their plan was actually quite simple. They would climb up the 12-foot base and attempt to measure the big chair by hand, and so they proceeded to do this. Things were going well until the security guard that was watching the property happened to spot them and came over to question what they were doing. Thinking quickly, the Bassett brothers replied that they were students from NC State and were doing a project for the furniture production degree program there. In their minds, this answer had some justification. They had both graduated from the program at NC State. The murky part of this explanation is that they had actually finished a program a few years earlier. However, the security guard was satisfied with their answer and let them continue with their project. In fact, the guard was so fascinated with what they were doing that he kindly helped steady the ladder and even held the light for them. How nice! And so the Bassett brothers were able to measure the Thomasville big chair from top to bottom. Arriving back in the town of Bassett with the measurements in hand, the Bassett brothers passed the specs to Bassett's famed lead designer, Leo Juronic, who came up with the overall chair design. The plants were soon tooled up to manufacture the chair. Ed Bassett commissioned all the necessary means and materials to ensure that the chair could be manufactured. A list of materials used will be displayed at the end of this video. And with that, the factory went right to work on building it with Eddie Bassett assigned to the task of supervising the construction. Here you can see when the chair was moved outdoors, where it was finished and then polished. After 1,100 man-hours, the chair was finally complete. The completed chair was made from solid mahogany from Belgian Congo. It was 19 and 2.5 feet tall, 9 foot 5 inches wide, 12 foot deep from front to back, and weighed 4,600 pounds. Bassett had succeeded in making a big chair that was bigger than the Thomasville big chair. It was a little more than 1 foot taller. The big chair was quite the big buzz at the time, and it was put out for display where employees and management could take photos of themselves with it. Shown here, about 200 of Bassett's salesmen also showed up for a photo. Then it was placed where the general public could come see it and take photos as well. Several newspapers and TV stations covered the event. What you see here is actual footage of the chair as it aired on WSLS TV at the time. Here you can see Eddie Bassett helping to put his daughters Sherry and Julia on the chair, and then later he also helped a special guest, Barbara Guthrie, to the top, who at the time was Miss Virginia. The big chair was fastened together with bolts that allowed it to be taken apart for transport. Because it was too big to fit into railroad tunnels and passages, the chair couldn't travel by rail. So on October 27, 1958, Roy Stone Trucking arrived with a truck, and Lester Lumber Company brought in a special lowboy transport trailer. Then the big chair was loaded up and made ready to be shipped to Washington, D.C. Eddie Bassett was responsible for making sure that it was delivered in good condition and to make sure everything went as planned. Interestingly, Eddie was a little bit late getting started because his son Jeb was born that same morning. After the chair arrived in D.C., it was soon permanently installed on a 5-foot pedestal. Then, on July 7, 1959, along with great fanfare, a dedication ceremony was held at the Curtis Brothers location in the Anacostia neighborhood. Newspapers everywhere wrote about it, and they all called it the world's largest chair. For many decades, the chair was a landmark and icon of interest to people passing through that part of Washington, D.C. Curtis Brothers eventually went out of business, and Bassett Furniture looked into reacquiring the chair. However, ownership of the chair had transferred to creditors, and then after realizing that the chair had become a regional landmark, Bassett Furniture decided to drop the issue. But the elements eventually took their toll, and the chair became unsafe due to rot. Since it was a treasured landmark, in 2005 the chair was disassembled and taken away with the intention of being restored. But instead of restoring the wooden chair, it was decided to erect an all-aluminum version of it that was manufactured to the tune of $40,000 and placed on the same spot as the original. There was a huge ceremony on April 26, 2006, and several hundred people showed up for the rededication. Even today, that chair is regarded as a significant piece of culture for the community. And there you go, the story of the big chair. Oh yeah, you're still wondering about the big chair that is currently standing in Martinsville. Well, that actually is not the original chair. Yes, that's right, there was yet another big chair that was erected in Uptown Martinsville in 2009 on the same location as the existing one. This second big chair was actually unveiled in 2002 as part of Bassett Furniture's 100th anniversary. It was an even bigger chair than the 1958 version, made from solid ash and measuring at 20 feet and 3 inches tall. It was modeled after a chair that was then offered in Bassett's Grove Park collection. There were several photos taken of the Centennial Chair while it was temporarily displayed outside of the Bassett Furniture corporate headquarters. It was then loaded up and used as part of a road tour marketing the Bassett brand. The Centennial Chair was trucked around the country to various Bassett retail stores and set out front as a promotion. Shown here is the Centennial Chair when it was at the Bassett store in Houston, Texas, with the Bassett Board of Directors enjoying a photo op. After the Centennial celebration was over, Bassett wanted to do something useful with the chair. They partnered with some other organizations in Martinsville, and it was decided to place the Centennial Chair in Uptown. In 2009, the chair was installed into a permanent space with signage that spoke about the history of the big chair and the local furniture manufacturing heritage. The Centennial Chair stood there for 4 years, but during that time, overseers failed to regularly keep up its annual waterproofing and maintenance, and ultimately its wood and fiberglass upholstery started deteriorating. By 2013, authorities realized it was unsafe to leave on display. The Centennial Chair was taken down and returned to Bassett Furniture, who loaded it up and stored it away for safekeeping in a warehouse. We managed to get a photo of the lonely Centennial Chair as it sits today in a corner in a Bassett warehouse down in Newton, North Carolina. Maybe someday the Centennial Chair will see the light of day again. You never know. And now, what in the world is the story about the big chair that is in Martinsville today? Well, in 2020, a new, handsome 21-foot replacement chair was placed in the same spot as where the Centennial Chair had stood, but this time manufactured in all-weather aluminum, ensuring that this latest model stands for many more years to come. If you haven't, be sure to check it out. Well, that's the story about the big chair, or big chairs, if you will. Let me shift gears a bit. Aside from all these big chairs, there is also, surprisingly, a little chair. To ensure that everyone was on the same page, a sample chair was made with which the overall design of the big chair would be based on. Charlie Bryant Jr., a plant power engineer, actually ended up with the sample chair. His family, who are still in possession of it, were kind enough to lend us a photo. How about that? Before we end this story, there actually is quite a bit more to tell about the original 1958 chair after it ended up in Washington, D.C. The local PBS weather station produced an excellent video about that. Look for the link in the description below and check it out. And thanks for checking this story out, and we certainly appreciate you watching our show today. If you like this video, we humbly ask that you give it a like and that you subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get notifications when we add more content. Your support helps us grow the channel to better service you. Thanks again for watching History Insight.